Nope, didn't mean to do that. Hi. Welcome, people of the internet, to my January wrap-up. We are going to discuss all of the books that I read in January. I read a total of 8 books in January, and I have some very interesting things to talk about. Starting off with the first book that I read in 2021, I made a whole video about it, and the result of that video was Every Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. This is a women's fiction romance about Evvie Drake. It's pronounced Evvie, by the way, not Evvie. The book clarifies that. And it's about Evvie coming to terms with her relationship with her late husband, as well as, what is his name? The boy. Not important. The boy also has his own drama. His career has kind of fallen apart recently. And I don't have a ton to say about this one. It was perfectly enjoyable. There was nothing wrong with it. It felt very cookie cutter. There were a couple of more interesting things that I enjoyed in it. There was some good talk about mental illness or like recovering from grief. Everyone goes to therapy in this book, which was, it was nice. Go to therapy. If you can go to therapy, recommend. It just kind of happened. And I don't regret reading it, and it was a perfectly nice book, but just not really anything super memorable. The second thing that came out of that video was the book I really should have read as the first book, but it was only available on audio. It's a whole thing, go watch that video. Anyway, that was The Favorite Sister by Jessica Knoll. This is a story about a reality show that's sort of the antithesis of The Real Housewives. It's called Gold Diggers. By the way, in an audiobook, Gold Diggers is very difficult to distinguish from Gold Diggers. I love that you wanted to put a punny title in there, but like, if you have to Google things while you're listening to an audiobook, maybe rethink some stuff. So it's about the show called Gold Diggers, about women in New York who are self-made and all of the drama that they get into. It takes a lot of twists and turns, and you don't really know what you're getting into. Especially the first half of this was very slow. It was a lot of just like petty drama for no reason, and they kind of hint at like there's a secret reason that this is all happening, but you don't really know what it is. And then at like the 50% mark, there's a twist. And oh boy, it gets wild after that. I ended up actually really enjoying this one. There were so many twists and turns in that second half that like it became a real thriller. And you know from the beginning that one of the girls is dead. It's like in the future, and one of the girls is talking about how one of the other girls has died. And then you figure out who and why and how. And it's crazy. I struggle to actually recommend this one because they're all just so horrible. They're the worst people ever, and all of the like twists that come out are like, hey, you thought they were bad? They're actually this much worse for very different reasons. But part of the reason that I struggle to recommend this book was because one of the narrators, there's 3, one of them is the token black girl on the show. Like, she talks a lot about her experience growing up being marginalized, her struggles to be respected in the same way that the other girls are. And this book was written by a white lady, and I kind of struggled with representation in that, especially during the second half when, like, spoiler, they're all horrible people, but Stephanie, the black character's name is Stephanie, somehow feels like she gets a worse rep than everybody else. Like, some of the characters do some really messed up stuff, and I would argue that one of these other characters is worse. She does way worse things than Stephanie does, but I feel like Stephanie gets more crap for it. I have a whole Goodreads review with all of the spoilers in it if you're not interested in reading it and you just want to get all of that juicy drama, but it was a very interesting ride. And so I hesitate to call it like problematic or anything like that, but it made me take pause. I don't really know how I'm supposed to feel about it. This is one that I will definitely be thinking about for a while because like it sneaks up on you as a thriller. I don't think I've read something quite like it, especially when they're all horrible people and you know that up front. The extremes that they will go to get what they want because they're already established as horrible people is like way worse than any other sort of domestic thriller. I feel like I'm selling this a lot. It's sort of like it's both a 5 and a 2. So I settled on a 3-star for this one. Oh, I don't think I said Evvie Drake is a 3-star as well. I am being a lot more critical with my ratings this year. Last year I think I would have just given it the 4, but I think now I can recognize the 3 for just like, it's a standard, it's a good book. The Favorite Sister doesn't have quite that reflection of its rating because it's both better than a 3 and way worse than a 3. It's gonna have a very specific audience for it, but if you're in that audience, then go for it. Next up we have Elatsoe by Darcie Littlebadger. This is a fantasy novel about a girl who is investigating the death of her cousin. And she is lip and patchy and she can communicate with spirits and she has a ghost dog, and this one ended up really surprising me. It went in a totally different direction than what I expected. It kind of turned into a mystery thriller by the end. The climax especially is just like wild and bombastic, but like in the best way. This is a universe where all fantasy creatures are real. So this universe has vampires and witches and fairies, and it's just kind of accepted. It's very interesting. I give this one 4 stars, and I think that was mostly based on personal enjoyment. A contemporary fantasy isn't my usual genre, but I really respected what it did. I'm just looking through all the tabs that I put in here. One of the characters says, "Death at my red mask." Mask of the Red Death is a book that I read last year that is about a pandemic. Not what this book is about, but I just thought that was a fun little nod to the times that we live in. I love getting to learn about the Lipan Apache culture. I thought everything in here was really well integrated. I don't know, I feel like this is a special book. I don't really know how to describe it, but it wove everything together in such a natural way when that should have been something that was really hard to do for a book about ghost dogs and vampires and colonialism. It's great. Highly recommend. Also, it's beautiful. There are illustrations at the top of every chapter and they're incredible. The illustrations really do add something to it. It makes it really special. The dog in this, Kirby, is unbelievably precious. He's a very good boy. I think the thing that stopped this from being 5 stars for me was just the fantasy aspect. I felt like there was a lot of world building that I don't necessarily care about, but it was still an excellent read. The next book that I read was The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. This was the book that I read for the Buzzword Readathon, and I was trying to remember why this book was on my TBR. It was on it for a while and then I took it off, and then semi-recently I added it on again. And after I started reading it, I remembered that the reason that I added this back to my TBR was a video that Ariel did about books with pandemics in them. Yeah, it's a pandemic, because of course it is. Everything somehow can relate to a pandemic now. I don't know. This one starts in a college dorm where one of the girls falls asleep and just never wakes up again. Eventually her heart slows so much that she just dies. And then this sleeping kind of spreads throughout the dorm and then slowly the community and how everyone is affected by it. It focuses on a number of POVs that sort of intersect over the time. I know I said in my TBR that I thought that this book was going to be like that one scene in Inception, which it definitely wasn't, except right at the end there's almost like a throwaway line about something that is eerily similar to it. So I'm gonna take that one as a win. I think the writing was especially beautiful. I took down a bunch of quotes from it that I really enjoyed. Although there is one that I want to read to you, just, you know, for pandemic-y reasons. By now, experts in contagious disease have begun to fill the rooms of the bed and breakfasts in Santa Laura. These scientists who have floated down the Congo to reach villages hot with hemorrhagic fever or swap the saliva of bats in the remotest caves of southern China. Not saying Karen Thompson Walker knows something the rest of us don't, but it's a little eerie for my taste. I respect what it did, but I had an okay time reading it. I don't think it's going to be something that really sticks with me long term, other than that quote. Next up, I read An Anonymous Girl by Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen. This is the second book by that author duo, the third one that I read. And I had heard once that if you liked The Wife Between Us, which is their first book, then you would not like An Anonymous Girl, and vice versa. I loved The Wife Between Us. Like, it's my favorite of theirs by far. It was one of the ones that I had to cut from my top 10 of the year. Like, it almost made the cut. It's like top 15. Fun and propulsive is what I think of when I think of their books. And this one was neither of those things. It started off really strong with our main character entering a trial about morality, where they're basically asked a bunch of questions about scenarios and how they respond, or like, tell me about a time when whatever happened. And then slowly she starts to get involved with the instructor, you know, on a personal level, and some stuff goes down. But this one was so dull. It barely had any twists. I don't know if maybe what happened qualified as twists to other people, but it read very straightforward to me. And the thing that really knocked it down, am I saying any star ratings? I am, okay. And the thing that really killed it for me was that I had 10% left in this book and I struggled to finish it. Like, I would pick it up for a page and then put it down and pick it up and put it down, which never happens. Like, every Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen book that I've read so far was just, you fly through it. You can't put it down, even if it's like not the most sophisticated. It's so compelling and you just want to finish it. And this one, I literally could not bring myself to finish. I did finish it eventually, but it was so agonizing and it made me really sad and kind of question how these two came out of the same author duo. But if there's anything that I've learned from reading An Anonymous Girl, it is to always trust the internet. I am sorry, internet. I will never doubt your sentience again. The next book that I read was Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning by Cathy Park Hong. This is about the author growing up in America as the daughter of immigrants, examining the way that she and her parents have been treated and talking about her work and all of her life experiences, as well as a bit of history. And I'm really sorry, but this one didn't work for me. There was a lot in it that I did really enjoy and respect. The beginning was especially well done. It talked a lot about the model immigrant and why Asian Americans are sometimes not considered people of color because she talks in one point about how someone described them as next in line to be white, which is like gross. And a lot of things about her parents growing up, her parents and grandparents and their experiences in the Korean War and the way that they are treated and how that's affected her life. But the thing that killed it for me was a good portion of this book focused on the author's career as a poet and her experience in art school. And oh wow, do I not care about either of those things. I feel like the culture around art is so toxic. I want to say toxic. It feels so pretentious and so academic and not at all relatable to the general public. I totally respect the need for art, but I feel like the study of art and the pretension around it really bothers me. And there was a bunch of stuff about her talking about how they did a semester in Paris and everyone did drugs, and like, that's not the kind of story that I care about. And I totally understand why it's in there and how it affects her as an Asian American. And she talks about how minorities are underrepresented in the art world, which is like all totally valid. It's not something that interests me at all. The history of Korean Americans and the experience is more what I cared about. And so this one, normally I give everything 5 stars, but this one I really struggled to get through a lot too. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I would still recommend it if it's something you're interested in. Maybe just skip the parts about the art, unless that's something you're into, and then maybe this is the book for you. Next up, it's time for a rant. The Midnight Library by C.L. Polk. This is a historical fiction fantasy. My bad. I should have known this was not going to be my thing. But look at this cover. It's so pretty. I could not buy it. I regret it. This was so not my thing. The thing that I think is the most telling in here is I have 1 tab in here, and it's to mark an error in the book. In Elatsoe, I have way more tabs. I still don't tab a lot, but I have way more tabs, all with like poignant quotes or references to other things that I just really enjoyed and wanted to look back on. And yeah, that wasn't the case in The Midnight Bargain. This just felt so unnecessary to me for some reason. I really hate period dramas in general. A lot of this was about, okay. So this book is about the bargaining season, which is basically when all of the eligible young men and women show up and try to bone each other. But like, you know, chaste looks across the room and stuff. There's no boning. This would have a higher rating if there was boning. That's already stupid, and our main character doesn't want to get married. And like, yeah, obviously that's not the way it should be done. That's why, for the most part, that's been a tradition that's been stopped. So there were a lot of things like that, like she wants to be able to work and like have a career for herself. And it's like, yeah, I agree. You don't have to convince me for 400 pages. Maybe it's just me. This should have been gay. I don't know why this wasn't gay. It opens with the main character walking in and meeting the 2 Lavon siblings. So there's Leonte, the boy, and Isabetta, the girl. And she should have fallen in love with the girl instead of the boy. It would have made so much more sense, especially because there's so much talk in here about family planning. Honestly, this feels like an allegory about birth control, which sounds insane when I'm saying it, but that's the only thing that I can come up with for this. Other than like, you know, the standard feminism practices that like make sense. They have to wear a collar when they get married, because if you're a sorceress, a spirit can invade the body of your fetus. It felt like such a nothing problem that I didn't care about at all. And it went on for so long. The other thing is every man in this book is just the absolute worst. Like they're either trying to kill her or lock her in a tower, except for the main love interest, who is just like feminism's #1 fan. He would do literally anything for this girl that he's known for 5 seconds, and he would lay down his life, and he's just perfect and dreamy, and also he's rich and charismatic. I hated that. I didn't care about this guy because he was just too perfect and didn't have any problems. Like sometimes she would have to explain things to him, but he never gave her any pushback and was just like, yeah, I'm totally cool to step down. I'm totally cool to give up my power, which is like not a thing, and especially not a thing for every single other man in this book. The resolution in the end ended up being really stupid. The whole time they're trying to track down all of the books that will give them the secret to perform the secret ritual so that they bond with a greater spirit so that then they don't have to get married. The logistics of why that would make it so they don't have to get married were very unclear, but that's beside the point. In the end, they like just don't do the ritual. The whole purpose of it, they end up doing this other thing, and then all of a sudden the ritual worked. It was very confusing. And then there's like the secondary conflict, which they solve by going into international waters, which sounds like a joke. Like, that's just not a thing that you do. It was mind-boggling. I had such a hard time reading this book. I wanted to DNF this book a dozen times, probably. And the only reason I got through it was because of the audiobook. The audiobook narrator is excellent. If you're gonna go through it, highly recommend. So I read the physical book as well as listening to the audiobook at the same time. And it just drags and drags and drags. And I felt like even if it wasn't the worst thing ever, because the writing was fine, everything in it was fine, I just didn't care even a little bit. And I struggled with my rating, but I thought like, if I had such a problem getting through this book, it's inevitably a 1 star, so Sorry, Midnight Bargain, you are beautiful, but I hate you. So I finished that book on the 29th of January, and I had 2 days left, and I was like, well, I guess I'm just gonna call this month a bust if the best book that I read was Elatsoe. And like, I gave it 4 stars. It definitely deserves 4 stars, but I don't know if it was quite 4 stars of enjoyment. And so I was like, what's something small I can just pick up? And so I grabbed The Giver by Lois Lowry, and oh boy, wow, is this book good. I remember reading this one in school, and I remember really enjoying it. The cover with the old man on it, that is very nostalgic for me, which is weird. But it ended up being so interesting. I definitely see why I would have enjoyed it as a kid. It feels like it's very bare bones. It's very up for interpretation, and I think you'll take something away from it each time you read it. Like, it could basically be an allegory for anything. It could be an allegory for race, it could be an allegory for sexuality, it could be an allegory for mental illness. It feels like it is so applicable to any aspect of a person's life, and I enjoyed it so much. My one gripe with it, it's a middle grade book. The main character is 11 and 12 throughout it, and so it's written very much in that way. Other than there's this one very disturbing scene with the death of a newborn that I really struggled with, and like still am not super okay with. I understand why it was in there for plot reasons, but I feel like there was a way to get around it. I'm just very interested in how I would have perceived that as an 11 or 12-year-old. Very interesting. I do wonder what I took away from this book the first time, because there's a lot of applicable stuff. This one is one that has stuck with me, I think, more so than any other required reading around that time. There's so much good in this book, and I think there's a reason that it has lasted this long, and I think that it is really up to interpretation so that it doesn't age itself as quickly, because this book is written in '93. So it's coming up on 30 years, and I didn't really find any problems in the language or in the accessibility of like technology and stuff like that, which is often a problem in sci-fi and dystopian books. The edition that I had also included Lowry's Newbery Award acceptance speech, which I thought was so good. I don't know, I have a real thing for like the author's note at the end. I think it just provides so much context around it, and it brings a whole other aspect to the story and sort of brings it into the real world, which I thought was really interesting. I'm sure it's online somewhere. I would definitely recommend it though. I don't know, I feel like I have so much to say about it and also so little. There was a point where I was going to start highlighting quotes that I found in it that I liked or found poignant, and then at a certain point I realized I'm just highlighting the whole book. So I stopped doing it because it's only 200 pages. If I want to get something out of it again, I can just reread it, and I honestly think I might. It's stuck in my brain a lot, and this is one, so I had 2 days to read it, and I really wanted to savor it, but then somehow I just like ended up flying through it without even realizing. I just think it's such an excellent book. This book also helped me realize that one of the tropes that I really love, it has to do with memory. There's a lot of stuff in here about memory, and then I realized like a lot of my favorite books have to do with memory, so I'm definitely going to be seeking some more like that out in the future. I did also want to mention, only because I mentioned it in my TBR, that I DNF'd Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. There was nothing really wrong with it. I just felt like it was very reminiscent of Fahrenheit 451, which if you watch my worst books of 2020, it's on there, and I just didn't care enough to push through. I honestly read like 5% of it and then DNF'd, so I didn't really give it a fair chance, but there was no real reason for me to push through, so I just DNF'd it. And finally, I just wanted to get a little update on how Fellowship is going. I am only 93 pages in. I definitely didn't focus on this one very much. We're like just leaving Bag End literally now, but it's good. It's definitely very exposition-y. There's not a lot of action, but we're gonna do it. We're gonna get through it eventually. It's not this month, but mark my words, one of these days I will read this damn book. And that's all I have. Those are all of the 8 books that I read in January. Honestly, I found it kind of a disappointing month. Right up until that end there, Greer really saved it for me. In terms of the follow-up from the first book of 2021 video. If I'm learning anything from Evvie Drake, it's kind of gonna just be a nothing year. It'll be a lot of the same, which I'm sorry to say, but if we're considering The Favorite Sister the first book of the year, it's gonna be a wild ride, and like halfway through something's gonna go down and none of us are gonna see it coming, and it's not gonna be a good thing. Yeah, overall January was just kind of disappointing, but I have some good books lined up for February, so I am hopeful. I'm glad that I got to do 8. They were all fairly short books. I didn't read anything over 400 pages, but I read 8. My Goodreads stats look good, and at the end of the day, isn't that what matters? Anyway, thank you all for joining me, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!